Welcome, everybody, to the Royal Institute of Navigation Outdoor Adventure Navigation Group talk. And this month we have got Tristan Gooley, the natural navigator, telling us who knows what. We're keeping it very relaxed. It's an in conversation. I do have a few slides that I will share if we struggle to keep the conversation going. But I think initially, I'm happy if you are, Tristan, just to sort of chat about how you got into it. I mean, it's a great thing. So I love the talk, your talk title, which is for every journey should consider natural navigation. So I guess first question, how did you get into natural navigation?
I found out at a young age that journeys that I was shaping were much more interesting to me than being led on something. So
Okay.
if even at a sort of very young age, so even at the sort of age of 10, 12, 14, if I was given two options, one is you are going to take yourself up this very modest hill and do whatever you want and come back, or this fantastic leader is going to take you up this, you know, wonderful mountain that's 10 times the size. I would instinctively prefer the former. There's just something in my character, it manifests itself in lots of different ways. We don't need to go into all of them, but sometimes it's a little bit of a rebellious spirit. Sometimes it's a little bit pioneering, and there are lots of other adjectives as well I could attach. But that was the thing, is that I really enjoyed shaping journeys before I knew what the word navigation meant. But once I realized that there's an art and a wonderful skill without which you are basically following somebody. And that's what I say to people. Every single journey we go on for the rest of our lives, we are either passengers or navigators in some form. And that's not a judgment. There are lots of times if I go on holiday, more often than not, I do not want to be the navigator for the international bit. Um, but it's just being aware that that's a choice, and we can sometimes blend the two. If you're on a bus on a route you haven't done before, you can kind of like look at what's going on and say, yeah, I think the bus is going to turn left in a minute. And then when it does, you feel a satisfaction because you're stepping into the navigator mindset, even if you're not the navigator. But yeah, that's and then what happened was I started putting journeys together, and when I was very young, they were obviously incredibly modest, and then ponds became lakes, became oceans, hills became mountains, and the journeys got to the point where I was using every single journey as an excuse to take my skills to another level. So I can remember very distinctly friends wondering what on earth I was doing with 2 weeks off work in my early 20s, when I'd try and get from one place to another in some harebrained from their perspective way. But what I was probably doing is trying to push my understanding of, say, instrument navigation in aviation to another level. Then what happened was the expeditions got to a point where I felt, my broad goal was I wanted to be able to get from A to B on foot, in a boat, or in an aircraft, pretty much anywhere if I chose to. That was my broad, very rough goal. But what I found was, as the journeys in theory got more ambitious, the some of the love of the navigation process evaporated. And I was doing some work in Romania recently, and I got to meet the Booker Prize winning novelist, Sir Ben Okri, or Okri. I never quite remember, but anyway, Ben, he's a really really nice
Yeah.
guy, and he was explaining that he was drawn towards physics as a young man, but when he got closer to the subject and got closer to knowing it, some of the poetry of physics disappeared. And I don't know if everybody knew what he meant when he said that, but I knew instantly what he meant. So there've been times, and to this day there are times when I think navigation is the most beautiful, wonderful, magical, poetical, sublime art there is. But there were times when I was going, why don't I feel the magic there anymore? And that's when I went, okay, let's try to try, let's try doing this differently. Instead of doing big journeys where it becomes mostly about kit, why not try some small ones? And I remember just that revolutionary feeling in my brain of kind of like, wow, just walking for 10 minutes using the sun and the trees was genuinely philosophically as exciting as the idea that I could cross an ocean or something like that. So that's the rough arc.
And so, what made you write that first book? I'm not sure which one was your first book, but what made you think, oh, I'm going to put this down in writing?
Yeah, there was an interesting process there where I'd been running courses for over a year, and they'd had an amazing response. I really didn't expect it. I had sort of steeled myself for the idea that the world would go, oh, you're doing another of your weird eccentric things, good luck. But there's not much call for finding a way using leaves and stars. So I thought at best it would be a sabbatical, and the courses proved really,
What sort of
really.
age were you at that time? How far through you?
The very first public course, I mean, I'd been teaching ad hoc. I've been teaching friends for years before that and running little informal things for a few years before that. But when I sort of stuck my head above the parapet with the first official public course, which was at the Royal Geographical Society, that was 2008. Um, uh, and yeah, as I say, my great fear was that I'd be in a room or outdoors on my own teaching this stuff, and the opposite proved the case. So what happened was it generated a little bit of buzz, and there was a bit of media interest. I remember the Sunday Times and Radio 4 and a couple of others were very kind and showed some interest, and I think that smoked a publisher out who approached me and said, "Would you like to write about this?" And my first reply was, I definitely would like to write about this, but I'm enjoying the teaching so much, and it's all consuming, as anybody who's ever taught anyone will know. It's not the easiest multitask thing to do. You don't sort of wake up in the morning thinking, oh, I'll do a bit of teaching and then I'll write for the rest of the day. Both of those activities in my mind are quite all consuming.
Yeah.
And so I said, why don't I teach, as I am doing now, really enjoying the interest in the subject. And then why don't we get back in touch in a few years, and then I'll write the book about it. And the publisher was very clever, and it's clearly not the first time they've been in that sort of conversation. They said, that's a very understandable, respectable way to look at this whole thing. Just tell me how you'll feel if somebody walks out of one of your courses in a week and you see their name on the front cover of a book about
Ah,
what you've just taught them in a year. So I went, yeah,
oh,
that's okay. All right, I see what you're saying here. The world is not always fair or kind, even when you're trying to do things in a. So that led to the Natural Navigator whilst still running the courses. So it did feel like there were a few balls in the air. And then when that book came out, something I could never have guessed, but was wonderful, was I realized that it's a way of teaching really, which allows me to continue my own development, which has been what I've been doing since.
fantastic. So you've obviously traveled all around the world. We've seen your, sort of resume, your bio. Where in particular did you find natural navigation particularly important or interesting or any of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting question because it depends both on my perspective, but also sometimes the people I'm thinking of whilst I'm doing it, because it's a cliche for a good reason. Every day is a school day. But there have been times when, so that I'm very delighted and grateful that the subject appeals to such a wide band of people. So at one end, which we could think of as the sharp end, we've got people who are going into wilderness areas because they have little choice for what they need to do. It can be medical, it can be search and rescue, it can be military, and I've worked with all of those groups over the years, and the feedback there is, some of this is fun, but some of it for us is a bit more than fun. So the jungle, for example, is where natural navigation is still a primary means of getting from A to B sometimes, because satellite navigation systems quite often don't work under canopy, particularly wet rainforest canopy,
Mm.
and maps are notoriously bad. Mapping jungle is not a fun way to spend a few weeks. So so there it's rare anybody will use natural navigation as the sole primary means unless something's gone wrong. But there are parts of the world where it is still a more practical way of getting from A to B than the most modern systems. But then on a personal level, the things that I find most interesting is when I'm able to both find new methods or new interpretations of old methods, and superimpose them on, so both new methods of both direction finding, i.e. orientation, and map making. So for me, it's not so much about a geographical location as where a place opens something up that's new. So most of when I'm writing, I'm typically sharing a new perspective on an old method, or when things have gone very well, a new method. I very rarely would say I discover something though.
Okay.
Even on the best of days, I'm rediscovering something. But those, I see my work as a treasure hunt, and so it could um, it could be me going for a walk in my local woods in Sussex and just having a breakthrough, going, oh wow. Um, this morning I was out and about and I saw there's a sort of understanding in the woods that it rains twice. It rains when the rain falls from a cloud, and then some of that water sits on the canopy and won't come down until later. And the thing that normally shakes it off is the wind. But with a tiny bit of experience in the woods, you get to know the difference between the pattering sound from wind and from animals. And I've been using that technique for ages to build an awareness of what animals are doing and sense winds and weather changes. But this morning, I had that wonderful experience where it had rained and the sun had come out, and the sun was cutting through a gap in the trees. And for the first time ever, I used that technique visually. This was not about map making in the traditional cartographic sense. I wasn't thinking, that's put this object in this part of the landscape relative to me. Or in a sense, it was telling me that there was a bird taking off. Initially, I wasn't sure if it was a squirrel jumping or a bird taking off. And then when I watched it a little bit more, but basically the way the light was catching the raindrops, and they were too faint and too distant for me to hear them, but I saw them, and I went, that is not the wind. That is something else. So it's most likely a bird or a squirrel. And then I was kind of going into that. So that's a bit of a tangent, but that to me is as exciting as, I was having fantastic fun tracking bears and bison and things like that in Romania, which is wonderful because it's new knowledge. But the one isn't better than the other. As a writer, it's a tiny bit easier to write about discoveries in Romania because it does some of the entertainment for you, if you see what I mean. Whereas if I'm just talking about my Sussex woods, I've got to take the writer with me, and I'm doing that role. But yeah, so it's for me, it's very rarely a geographical where. It's more about breakthroughs and rediscoveries.
Excellent. So I forgot to mention that we are both super happy for people to put questions in the Q&A and chat in the chat. Peter has already posted saying, perennial question amongst navigators, do you regard natural navigation as an art or a science, or both?
That's yeah, it's a very interesting question. I can't think of having been asked that in that exact way. So thank you for that. I think it is definitely both, and my approach is that it's the foundations are science, and the practice and the joy are related to art. Now, the word art, like the word nature, has dozens of interpretations itself, and we can kind of use the word art in any way we want. But if we think of it in the context of a practice that we hone through regular application and development, and in a personal sense, then yeah, it's for me, it's there are different areas. So if we take astronomy, that's much more science. You can teach somebody to find north using the stars in under a minute, and it's a very scientifically based and practiced part of natural navigation. You can then show somebody how a leaf can give you a sense of direction. If it's pointing at the ground, it's facing out. It's harvesting light from lower down. It's more likely to be south facing. But just being taught that doesn't give you a huge amount of skill. It's hopefully philosophically interesting, but it's quite hard to go out there and just glance at a leaf and go, oh, that way's north or south. So it takes a lot of practice, and it becomes more of an art form. So the way I tend to think about it is celestial cues, sun, moon, stars, planets to a lesser degree, are, if we were to put a kind of ratio on it, they're kind of three quarters science, one quarter art. Whereas I think of the sky leaving footprints on the ground, both in terms of sun, wind, water, and interpreting those footprints is more of an art than a science because it's probably three quarters a quarter. The science is sometimes incredibly simple. If we think of another example, yeah, puddles are more common in shaded areas, and we get more shade on the south side of east-west tracks. A little bit of science, but it takes quite a lot of looking at puddles before you get a very strong sense of direction. And that's a process that goes on and never ends. So that is definitely more an art form. And I see it as an art form in another way, which is not related to practical outcomes. It's more about calling in a sense, and by which I mean, there are artists and writers and creators of all different hues who are not driven by the outcome. They're driven because it's a process that is rewarding in its own right, and that I think is an art form. So I had absolutely no need to tune to clues and signs outdoors this morning, but I do it because I feel the need to practice the art, and that's yeah. I could go on and on, but
No,
that's
it's
my
great,
take on it.
and I think an art rather than art, is different again. I guess. I mean, you do put illustrations in your books. I think right from the first one. Do you draw those out and get an illustrator to do them? Are they? How do you choose what to actually visualize in the books?
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. I'm a great believer in expertise and specialization. And I'm going to give you one example of that. I was giving a talk to a group of forest school leaders on Saturday, and the first point I said to them was, I said, I'm a great believer in specialization. I can share with you my philosophy and ideas and methods, but you are the experts with the groups you're working with, mostly young people, but not exclusively, some older groups. And I said, that's part of your expertise. So I can only share the knowledge in the way that it makes sense to me, and I hope will to you. But you then take your expertise on into that other area. So with illustrations, there's always been an artist involved in my books. I actually really quite like it when I pick up a book and I see the artist has done an honest effort, but it's clearly not they didn't win the art prize at school. I would definitely fall in that category. I think I could probably get the idea across. And in fact, it's quite an amusing visual dialogue that goes on when I'm the artist I've worked with most and who has illustrated almost not all but almost all of my books. Neil Gower, a fantastic artist, heavily involved in the covers as well. Um, and and by the time you're going for an illustration, you're going for something that is some people will know what I mean by platonic forms, but basically the core idea. And so it's something that's very important, but it's also something that is more powerfully literally more powerfully illustrated by illustration. So
Yeah,
so you're briefing something partially with words and sometimes with some of my appalling sketches. And I think in the acknowledgements of my last book, I make that point. I say, Neil's having to try and convey a powerful, simple idea that is not easy to do with just words. Otherwise, there probably wouldn't be an illustration based just on my words or my appalling drawings. So the short answer is there are artists involved, very good ones, including Neil and a couple of others, and for good reason. But I'm not possessive. I don't feel I should control or create everything in my books. I'd much rather that the reader gets the most helpful messages.
brilliant. Uh, Another question, Hugo. Thanks for the question. Well, what's your memory of the worst time you were lost and the best time you were lost?
Yes. Uh, I the worst time has is now a fond memory, but it was truly traumatic. When I was 19, I was backpacking with a very good friend who was far too trusting, and like most backpacking 19-year-olds, we were permanently skint, and we were trying to climb Mount Rinjani in Lombok, and we decided that the
Can
right
I ask where that
preparation.
is? Where's Lombok?
Lombok's an island in Indonesia. It's the island just east of Bali. So you're
Right.
not too far off these days it's very much on the beaten path. It's a very popular holiday destination now, but it was slightly less so
Yeah.
when I was 19, 33 years ago, scarily. Um, and we decided to try and climb this mountain, which I always forget exactly how high it is. It's between I think about 11 and 12,000 feet, roughly that. I can't tell you in meters. It's old money for mountains for me there, but we decided, or I decided, that the cost-effective, pragmatic way to try and tackle this quite big lump, which happened to be an active volcano, was to tear, I think it's 4 pages out of the Lonely Planet to save on weight. But it had a sort of didn't even have a proper map. It just had a sort of description of the popular route up. And near the summit, we had a appalling kit. We had a leaking tent we borrowed from a bunkhouse. We had no means of heating food or water. We had no maps, no compasses, obviously no GPS. And we got within 500 feet of the summit was our best estimate. But my friend, who was even wetter and colder than me, went down with hypothermia. So I was trying to get us down fast enough to get him, to a safer temperature because it was freezing up there. Um, and in the hurry, I passed where we'd, pitched the tent, which had our few little bits of cheese and a few dry biscuits and a couple of other, bits of warm clothing that we had. So we were then completely 100% totally lost with no means of no navigational instruments whatsoever. And we walked for 3 days with no food. We ran out of water fairly quickly, but being a sort of tropical area, water wasn't the biggest problem. And we happened to have Puratabs on us, the sterilizing tablets. So we were scooping water out of little pools and adding the tablets. And I remember to this day just watching the little you know I don't know what they'd be, zooplankton. No, they must be bigger than that. But little critters basically swimming around and then stopping swimming and sinking to the bottom, and then we'd be
Oh,
drinking off the top of that.
oh, no.
But we were 100% because of inexperience. It happened because of inexperience and hubris, and it we were 100%, no, 99.5% sure we were going to die. We were working out how to write messages to loved ones and things like that. And we only found our way out. We tried following animal trails. We tried following trails thinking they looked a bit human, but
Mm.
sort of knowing they couldn't be because we couldn't see any footprints, human footprints. And then they would always peter out, which is one of the mysteries of sort of animal trails in proper wilderness, is somehow these animals do seem to kind of create these trails and then they sort of end up at a waterfall or something unhelpful. But
Yeah.
and then we were quite close to losing the will. We were saying things like, "Let's ditch, the bits we've got to reduce weight because we're going to run out of energy." We were so naive. We thought that 3 days without food was close to the point where we would collapse. Um, so, but then we saw these trails, this one trail that had a parallel trail, and we thought, let's go and check that out as a last sort of roll of the dice. And it ended up being the very end of a 4x4 track, which took us to a village. And we went into the village, and we were, the villagers. I don't know what they made of us, but we were babbling euphoric. There was not one word of English spoken by them, and we didn't have any of the local dialect. So that was the worst. The best time is more hundreds, if not thousands, of tiny occasions where. So what I'm routinely doing is stepping away from a handrail and back to it. So anyone, lots of people in this chat will be familiar with the handrail concept, but if you're not,
Yeah.
one of the most helpful.
Explain what.
Yeah, so
Mm.
one of the most helpful things in all navigation is to have a linear feature you can follow. And we all do it all the time. If you say to somebody, walk down to the high street until you reach the McDonald's and turn left, that's two of the building blocks of most effective navigation. You've got a linear feature, a handrail, and then a landmark. You put those two things together, and you can navigate in most environments. But the nature of them changes. So, in wilderness terms, the handrail becomes a river or a ridge line. And what I'm saying to people in natural navigation is that sometimes all we're doing is taking very, very well established concepts and taking a slightly more refined view of them. So if you're taught outdoor, navigation skills, the definition of a handrail will typically stop at something like a road, a railway line, or a ridge line, or a river, or something like that. But in natural navigation, what we're sometimes doing is trying to appreciate that where broadleaf trees change to conifers, that is a line. It wouldn't typically be considered a handrail, but if you've got a good enough sense of where and why that's happening, you can consider the line around a mountain where the broadleaf trees stop. It's not going to be a perfect line. It's going to be bumpy and it'll be higher on some sides and lower on other sides for good kind of climate geography reasons. But that is still a handrail. It's not an easy one to follow, but it is followable. Equally, if you go all the way up to the top where the trees give up altogether, that's the tree line. That's another, not very straight, but handrail in some terms. So that for me is those are the most exciting things I'm doing, is stepping away from a handrail and coming back. And for me, they tend to be when I'm using subtle, if you notice the geology change slightly, so the plant life change and then the animals, the insects in turn sort of change, just very, very small things like that. If I go on a very, very small natural navigation exercise, I'm not technically lost at this point. And that I think is worth a small digression, because what I say to people is nobody's ever 100% lost, and nobody ever knows 100% of everything they could do about where they are. So
Mm.
somebody can give, to X decimal points a latitude and longitude, but they might not have worked out that the trees change 20 meters behind them. So they don't know everything. They have one technical, accurate idea of where they are on planet Earth, but they certainly don't know everything about where they are. Equally, if somebody says they're 100% lost, tangent off tangents, but that's what I love about these chats. I know one of the two-person team who've been writing the Bond films for the last couple of decades, and we have these fun chats. And he was writing something. He said to me, if somebody was kidnapped, blindfolded, and stuck in the back of a van, you know, would they be 100% lost? And I said, well, only if they're totally oblivious, because for a start, let's say the van drives 1 hour, you can estimate average speed. Let's say the average speed was 60 miles. Okay, we've got a radius now. You're roughly 60 miles from the start point. Did the engine work very hard at the beginning? So you went uphill at the beginning. Okay, well we've halved the circle then, and that sort of idea. So yes, I could go off and
You're on my list of people to get hijacked with. I'm like, I need to be with Tristan, because neither of those two things I would have thought of, but it absolutely makes sense. Yeah.
but it's true to the indigenous way of you know map making in that and this is I lead a few sort of different types of courses, but I always try, even if it's a very short course, I always try and come back to this basic idea that if you can work out how to get to a handrail and then which direction to turn when you hit the handrail, you can find your way out of almost anywhere. And if let's take an urban version of this and then a wild version, but they're pretty much the same thing theoretically. If you're in a town you don't know very well and you've worked out the high street runs west east, then you could see an interesting side road that goes off that, and you head north up that, leaving the high street behind you. Now, all you do is you say to yourself, how am I going to get back to the high street? Oh, it's a sunny day, it's lunchtime, I'll head towards the sun. Or you could use the TV satellite dishes that are pointing close to southeast in this country. Or you could use the fact that the high street is mirroring a river and is therefore slightly lower, so you could go downhill. But you then take a right turn and you do a little bit of investigating the shops there. There will very quickly come a moment where if somebody said to you, do you know exactly where you are? If I opened up this map of this town, could you point to the building or the block of buildings you're in? And you would say no. And they say, okay, so you're lost. No, all I have to do is find my way back to High Street and turn right. Now that is so obvious, but so many of these things, the most powerful concepts are obvious. We just choose not to kind of think about them in that way. The naturalist E.O. Wilson said the obvious is usually profoundly significant, and that's one of my guiding principles. We do exactly the same thing in the wilderness. We just might change the scale. You could, let's say, for example, you're on the east coast of Australia. you could head inland, head west, using conventional navigation methods, as much electronics as you want. You could then head north for a similar amount of time. Let's say you headed inland for 2 days, you then headed north for 2 days. You could use the rising sun to find the east coast. Then you know to turn right. You will get back to your start point. To use the UK version, if you're anywhere, if you're anywhere in the south of England, let's say you're in London. I do this as an example to people. I say to people, what is the fastest foolproof set of directions you could give somebody to find Falmouth? And if they aren't aware, it's in Cornwall on the south coast, and you just follow the midday sun until your feet get wet and turn right. You will you will find it. There'll be a lot faster ways of getting there, but to illustrate the point, so that's the principle behind natural navigation is you're not and being honest, the mis I don't know if I term it as a mistake or a misguided or a misunderstanding, but for about 5 years at the beginning of my natural navigation journey, I thought it was primarily about direction finding. But direction finding on its own in a natural sense is not that useful practically because the navigators will know that the 1 in 60 rule for if you are 1 degree out and travel 60 units, let's say 60 nautical miles, then you will be 1 nautical mile out. So all you have to do is travel, be 10 degrees out, which in terms of natural wayfinding is still you're still doing quite well, and travel for a little over 100 miles, and you're going to be 10 miles from where you think you are. So that on its own, you can't psychically go, which way do I turn then? So this leads to all the traditional conventional techniques like aiming off. So prior to satellite navigation, even in the days when there was quite good radio direction finding methods and things like that, there's still the good practice of if you're sailing or flying or walking long distance and you're trying to find a point, let's say on a coastline, it is more pragmatic to miss it and know exactly which side of it you are, i.e., which way to turn, than to try and hit it. And if there's a high probability you're not going to hit it exactly, to hit that handrail and go, I don't know which way to turn. And there are many, many documented examples of people trying to hit something directly and missing, and then not knowing what to do, and then you're potentially in a not good situation for a euphemism.
Ah, I love the term handrail. It's not something. Is that something that you came up with early days of trying to explain this? Because we've talked as a group about sort of the linear barriers, the linear lines, but a handrail has a sense of being helpful. The whole yeah. So
Yeah, no, handrail is certainly not my term. It's been around for decades, if not centuries before me, and it is a very, very good visual. That's quite often the challenge in any new skills, not least navigation, is having a way to visualize what you're doing. And all I've tried to do is, in some areas, enhance and refine the view of what could be a handrail. I mean, related to that. I come across a lot of academic studies that assume that are based on very, very good principles, but from my perspective, slightly simplistic in terms of detail. So let me give you an example. There's a fairly well established principle that a human being is unable to follow an accurate heading, basically to walk in a straight line,
yeah,
without external reference to orientation and direction. And I'm not going to argue against that. That's very much true. It's been proven in scientific ways and in personal anecdotal ways. We've all walked in circles at points in our life, and that definitely happens. But what tends to happen is when this area is being researched, is people will assume that the external clue to direction is a mountain summit, the sun, or the moon, full stop. You know, whereas my point is generally that absolutely everything is asymmetrical. So the breeze on your face, the color of the tree, the way the bird is flying, the shape of the cloud, the gradient, the list is literally infinite. within a stone's throw of wherever you are outdoors, there will be well over 1,000 clues to direction. So you are never without some form. I 100% accept that it's a lot easier with a strong celestial cue. If the sun's out, or you can see the North Star, you can hold direction very, very accurately. Um, and in some, depending how you use a compass, it's sometimes better than a compass, because one of the things we're always doing, all of us, is staring at the means of finding direction rather than watching where we're going. But yeah, so that is the direction side of what I've been trying to do in natural navigation. But the handrail side, to come back to your point, is the sound of birdsong at the edge of woods. If you I once crossed Kielder Forest, because in my naivety, whenever this was, it was probably about 15, 20 years ago, I can't remember exactly. I thought it has a reputation for being wild. That's what I'm looking for. I'm going to, in any natural navigation exercise, you kind of want to know where you're starting, because otherwise, within an hour, you'll be questioning the whole validity of the exercise. So I would do what I quite often do, is I go, right, I'm starting at point A. I know exactly where that is. I'm going to try and find this reservoir, or this, I can't remember, this crossroads, or I can't remember what the goal was. Um, and I within about half an hour, I could see the folly of it. Dense coniferous, homogeneous, plantation is not fun to cross. And I was bleeding quite fast from all the scratch and stuff like that. But the one thing I do remember very clearly, and has stuck with me to this day, is that the sound of the birds goes down to close to zero when you're in the heart of the forest. And then as you get near the edge, you start to hear the birds again, because edges are you get spikes in biodiversity, not least the birds. So, as I was slightly losing the love of natural navigation, which happens even to me in passing moments, and that was one of them, I started to hear, and that was a position line of sorts. So lots of different ways of looking at that. We all do this. It's just we don't always think about it this way. If you are, I mean, one of the reasons I wrote an article for the Sunday Times when the sycamore gap tree came down, and none of us will ever know exactly all the reasons why all of us were triggered, to use the young parlance, on that. But my point was, any significant and dominant and unique feature is a very powerful landmark, and it was the difference between life and death until yesterday in genetic terms, and not that long ago in cultural terms. And so what somebody's doing when they remove a landmark like that is threatening us. So there are interesting examples when the I think when the Americans, I'm guessing it was Alaska, the Americans started to dismantle some communication equipment in Alaska, if I remember rightly, and the local Inuit communities were protesting about this, because it had become part of their reading of the landscape. So it's not the most romantic way to think about the landscape, but the truth is, if we remove anything, but the flip side of that is that if we become sensitive to the smaller landmarks, you know, in the book I've just written, The Hidden Seasons, I talk about how an individual stone chat was making sense of an area of otherwise nondescript scrubland in on the Isle of Mull in Scotland, and that's for me is the flip side. So instead of the negative of somebody stealing a landmark and that making us feel threatened, if we decide to tune into a subtle individual landmark that we might have overlooked, we get a very, very positive sense. Now, it may or may not help us practically, and to me that's almost irrelevant unless it's one of those very rare difficult situations. It gives us the opposite of the negative feeling of the sycamore tree being taken down. We are giving ourselves something. So all of these landmarks or sound marks or even scent marks, there's most of us, if popular culture is to be believed, remember things like smelling the sea on the way to the coast as on a childhood holiday. I certainly remember that. I remember, going down to Brighton or something like that, and the first person to smell the sea is all a game and stuff like that. But that's because it's tapping into this innate sense of we our brain loves it when we're tuning into a sense of where we are. Sometimes it'll be the biggest, proudest landmarks in cities. There's the Eiffel Tower is an amazing piece of architecture, and it's an extraordinary thing to look at and to visit. But above and beyond that, it's the ancient part of our brain is going, there's zero chance I'm going to be lost if I've got that out of the corner of my eye.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating. I know we have some images, and I'm mindful we've got a real mix of people on the webinar. So I am just going to share my screen just to show you some of the images that you've very kindly shared with me. Just to shift the story, because what you're saying is 100% exactly what I was hoping we would get from you. I'm super happy already. So I think just so that we've got the full range of what people might be wanting to get from this webinar, I don't think I haven't got any more questions. I'm just going to share my screen. These are the slides of images that you shared with me. Let's get them on full screen. And so I was interested just by this first image that you shared. There's a dog and a channel. That's all I see. Go on. Tell me what I should be seeing from this.
Yeah, well, I'll give everyone a few seconds just to study that and see if anything leaps out at them. And then I've already mentioned the word asymmetry, and to me that's one of the sort of cornerstones of outdoor observation for natural navigation. Here we can see that the two sides of this drainage ditch do not appear the same. That's three quarters of the challenge is just spotting that. And then with a little bit of practice and familiarity with individual habitats and plants that do well there, we notice, there's a plant on one side that's not on the other side. Oh, and okay, so it's heather. Heather is a sunlight, not just loving but demanding plant. So this is a large part of natural navigation. The way I think of it is, whenever we meet a plant or animal or anything else, a star, a cloud, we give it a little bit of curiosity and say, what's your story? And once we've done that, it'll start to whisper helpful stuff back. So heather needs a lot of direct sunlight. So we tend to find it on the south facing side of things where there's an incline like this. You will find it is doing better on the south facing side. So in this image, it's actually on the north side, because a bit counterintuitively, or the language is anyway, the north side of a ditch is going to be the south facing side. So we're looking very close to west in this image.
Okay, perfect. I love it. I love your sign. So you can sign up to Tristan's newsletter and you get one of these. I don't know how often you send it, each week, is it? I'm not sure, but I always have to look at the answer at the bottom. I'm sorry, I'm not getting any better at doing it. I was interested by this picture, just because it looks really old, but also very, very hostile as a place. Do you want to tell us where this is, and if navigation, how you were navigating?
Yeah, this was part of the conventional navigational self-education. So I mentioned I'd be doing trips to try and push my understanding. And I rang around some friends about 25 years ago and I said, why don't we try and get from England to the highest point of North Africa and back without buying a ticket? And this is the final approach to the summit of Mount Toubkal in the High Atlas. And what we did was, my friend had a lot of experience of land navigation. So what we did is we split the task. I sailed us, the two of us, from Southampton to Jersey in the Channel Islands. We jumped into a light aircraft, a Piper Archer, flew down the west coast of France and Spain. On one occasion, landing in a different country to the one we thought we would, because the winds were so different to what I was expecting. Got to Tangier, jumped into a 4x4, headed into the Atlas Mountains, and where the track stopped, we hopped out and continued on foot to the summit of Mount Toubkal, and then took a different route back. And the true joke I say about this is that I think it took 9 or 10 days, the whole thing. And I told my then girlfriend, now wife, that I was off to play golf, which was my way of saying, don't worry what I'm up to. She knows I haven't played a round of golf in my life.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. I love that. Yeah, and I love it. Oh, I just jumped on a plane and boat. I mean, it's fantastic. I
Yeah,
love it. I
but
love your life.
that was a stepping stone. It's obviously not the first one. It's quite far down the track of getting to the point of thinking. But I don't know whether I had an instrument rating as a pilot then. I think I did, but basically each time I'd be pushing my knowledge with the help of fantastic instructors and others, and
Yeah,
then I would set myself the goal because none of us really believe we have the skill until we're the ones who are the primary navigator.
yeah. And what about deserts? I mean, they strike me as somewhere that is particularly difficult to navigate. Is that the case, or is have you got to
Well,
encounter?
weirdly, no. One of the they're physically tiring, but and if you're in a dune system like this one in Libya, it's very very hard work, but it's to move any distance. But most deserts are not. They're stony plains. But they're still physically difficult. But navigation wise, they're amongst the easiest because unless you're in a sandstorm, you can see the sun or stars normally. I mean,
Right.
I once went to Oman to run a course and we didn't see the stars for 4 days, but that's incredibly rare. But here again, my early view, so in my 20s, my view was probably, oh wow, there's a dozen techniques that really work. I'm going to try and hone my use of these. And then I quickly realized, oh, it's not a dozen, there's more like 2 dozen. And then within a couple of years, I realized it's not dozens, it's hundreds. And then there's this tipping point moment where you realize this is not this is not a bag of secret skills. And once you've worked out all 48 of them, you've completed the level like in some weird computer game.
Yeah.
It's more a philosophy where everything will tell you something. Sometimes it's a very clear, easy, simple message, like the North Star. Um, Other times, it's really hard to decipher, and you're only getting a kind of mixed message and a bit of a whisper, like the slightly different colours on two sides of the bark of a tree, for example. This what we're looking at here is in the middle. So I'm walking on the windward side of the sand dune, where the sand is hard packed, and the gradient is hard to see the gradient in this image, but the gradient is slightly shallower. If I took 2 steps to the left, I'd be on the steep slip face, and you basically, if you don't fall over, you get absolutely nowhere, because absolutely every landscape on Earth has a relationship with the wind. At an advanced natural navigation level, we're thinking about a long, medium, and short term. So some of these dune systems, are hundreds, if not thousands, of years old. They don't look identical. 10 years, rewind or fast forward 10 years, you're going to see slight differences, but the relationships are with the wind. So so that this is in Oman, and what was rather nice was some of the things I'd learned in Libya from the Tuareg. I was able to teach to young instructors in Oman, and these are just tiny dunes. So this is a really good example of how, if you think, well, the relationship between the wind and the sand, if we know what the wind's been doing, we can make a compass. It would be quite easy to fall into the trap of we're only interested in dunes that are sort of 20 meters high or more. But these, you can see these tiny dune formations here are barely the height of a finger, and in these the wind has come from the left. What I got the young instructors to do is touch 2 sides of the ridge. So those dark lines are the ridge line of these tiny dune systems, and on the left you feel it's firm, and on the right it's both lighter in color and softer. So this is a each time a sandstorm goes through, these are much shorter term relationships. The pheasant's making quite a noise. Sorry. The what if you so when a sandstorm goes through, you're just tuning to the direction it's moving, and then all of these little ripples become a compass for you. But I don't know if you've got the next slide as well, but it's I know I had a slide, but we don't need to see it. But basically, if you go to any sandy beach in the world, go to the nearest beach to you if you're in the UK or wherever you are,
Yeah.
and you will find those patterns. So that to me is the most exciting thing possible. So when you're asking about, or somebody kindly asked about where getting lost or where navigating, to me the most exciting thing is when you stumble on a fundamental pattern. It doesn't matter where you are, you're meeting an old friend. So I learned about these things in the Libyan Sahara. I taught them in Oman, but I get huge satisfaction from spotting them on a Sussex beach or any other beach for that matter. And in fact, I obviously haven't been there, but I'm reliably informed by the bits of kit that we've sent there that these patterns exist on Mars. So that to me is the most exciting thing. This is like it's such a universal fundamental pattern, the relationship between wind and particles, that you can see these things in sand, in snow, in dust, even in little bits of flotsam on water, or even in city parks. They're absolutely everywhere.
Fantastic. Wow. Um, Completely different environment, but I was intrigued by the blood. Obviously, that was the thing that I thought there must be. Is that blood on your front?
It is, yeah, and it got a lot worse than that, but it sort of becomes a bit post watershed after that. But there was no serious harm. It was just as I'm sure you know, leeches inject you with an anticoagulant to stop your blood clotting so that they can have a more leisurely meal. And everyone reacts slightly differently to that. But I just found I bled quite a lot, and we were peeling. This is Borneo, and at one point, I mean, it took about 9 days to get from the coast to the interior to meet up with two Bedouin and Dayak tribes people, and then we walked for 9 days on a route that I felt would get allow them to showcase their skills, or to phrase it differently, force them to showcase their skills, because it was not an established route. It's one that they'd done a couple of times before but didn't do that regularly. And yeah, it was there's a sort of understanding amongst people in the uh, people doing adventurous types of travel that we're quite tribal, by which I mean there are some environments that we take to naturally. I quite like the desert. I don't mind being, I quite like being out at sea. Cold, I wouldn't choose, but I bet the jungle is just so exhausting. You literally cannot sit still for 20 minutes. The desert, if
You're
unless
just wet the whole time, aren't you? You're just literally wet.
and it's just so friendly to life that if you aren't making an active effort to sort of maintain your personal environment, then something will start calling you home quite quickly. And I just found it, it was
It
a
must be
wonderful
very
experience.
quick, easy to get disorientated within a jungle for most people. I mean, what was it that they were using to orientate
Yeah,
themselves?
I I really hoped I'd come back with a bag brimming with extraordinary techniques. And the truth is, because you're close enough to the equator, you don't have the strong north-south asymmetry in solar created clues, but also the nature of the winds in dense rainforests. Um, so a lot of the techniques that work in temperate environments are just out the window straight away. The flip side of that is they have very little interest in cardinal direction. I couldn't get the two tribesmen at all interested in north, south, east, west. So I was there to learn from them, not to
Yeah.
not to try and sort of layer my interests on them. So I gave up fairly quickly on that. And it was all to do with topography. So they are absolutely forensically tuned to gradient and back to handrails.
Right.
And there was a moment where this became, the penny dropped. We were walking. There were four of us, so the two Penan and my interpreter fixer, uh, and I would be walking and scribbling in pencil as we were walking. And the most interesting moments came when the two Panan were having a discussion about which way to go. And I kind of knew that if there was gold to be found, it'd be in those conversations. So I was scribbling down phonetically what they were saying. And then we paused at a water break. And I said to the interpreter, I said, "What do these words mean?" And I was sort of secretly hoping they'd be saying something like, "Well, the sun is there, therefore we want to go in the opposite direction towards our shadow," or something like that. That would make, and the words were uphill, downhill, upstream, downstream. They were relating to their entire map was to do with valleys and and gradient and the flow of water. And the real penny drop moment came when we were making camp, and I was trying to boil some water in a mess tin, and I'd misplaced the lighter, and the one of the Penang could see me scrabbling around hopelessly looking for this lighter, and said to the interpreter, "What, you know, what's he lost?" and stuff like that. And the interpreter said to me, "What have you lost?" And I said, "The lighter." And the message went back, and then Titus, the Penang guy, said to and then the interpreter said to me, "It's there just upstream of your mess tin." I can't remember if it was upstream or downstream, but it was definitely upstream or downstream of the
No.
mess tin. And that was a moment I went, "Wow!" So it's like I've never encountered them personally, but I've come across interesting studies of Australian Aboriginal tribes people who relate indoors in a cardinal sense. They'll say, "Past the salt, it's north of the
Yeah.
the plate." But it's just different ways of our understanding of our environment is tailored to what's available.
Yeah.
This was um, the solo transatlantic flight coming in low over a glacier in Greenland. And you can
Wow.
actually see near the top right, there's a runway in Greenland that I'm aiming for there. And it was
Bit,
probably technically the
bit or
most,
further
actually,
apart.
it's the pale smudge just before the water.
Oh,
There, that's
yeah.
it, yeah. Um,
Wow.
this in terms of conventional navigation, this is probably the most demanding thing I've ever done. And I went to 7 people for advice because it's such an unusual type of aviation. Um, and by the time I took off on this, it was my first solo flight on that aircraft type over water. 3 of the 7 people I'd gone to for advice on this flight type had died in a light aircraft crash between me asking them and me taking off.
Oh, God.
I think I studied 12 different fatal crash reports on this particular kind of region. So
Wow.
you're just, you're at the very edge of um,
Yeah.
sensible aviation, is how I'd put it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and solo transatlantic, it's incredibly hard to take a photo of a wave that looks big. So this doesn't do justice.
That did
But this
look big.
this
I thought that looked big. That's why I put it in there. I'm a sailor and I'm like, nah, I wouldn't like that chasing behind the boat. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is where you trust your training and experience because this is swell. This is not a breaking wave. I mean, the top of it makes it look like it's going to break, but it's not actually. So there's part of your senses and brain that are looking at. I mean, some of the swell was as high as the boat was long. There was definitely 10 meter swell out there, and you look at that sort of looming up behind you, and you've got the emotional part of the brain that is going, if that breaks on me,
Yeah.
it's potentially game over. And then you go back to the training and the trust of and you go, this is swell, it will not break. So it's that simple thing where knowing the difference between waves and swell, in theory, is a dry bit of knowledge. But
And
when
did you
you're
use natural navigation with that crossing, or were you using sort of standard equipment?
I was mixing it up the whole time. I was not. I had all the kit on the boat. I was doing quite a lot of what I would call low tech navigation. So I was. So in my this isn't a formal definition, but I see it as high tech anything that has electrons flowing through it, batteries or any other form of electricity. Low tech is tools that don't involve any form of electricity, and then no tech is my view of natural navigation. You've got no tools. So low tech, for my mind, includes compasses, but in this case, sextants, because this was. I mean, I was using the stars and things like that, and the sun, of course, and trying my hardest to learn from the swell, which is a lot harder than it sounds.
Mm.
Um, but I was also because you get limited opportunities to genuinely fix your position using a sextant. It's not the sort of thing. I mean, in theory, you could go and do it in a city park, but it's quite hard to put yourself in a situation where you don't actually know where you are. So what I would do is try and fix my position. I try and find direction using stars and sun, and then cross check against something else because it's still part of my training and my
Yeah.
development. And then I would fix my position using a sextant, and then use electronics, then use GPS and see how I'd done with the sextant because it was kind of
Mm.
so it wasn't a primarily natural navigation exercise. It was a kind of
I'm mindful of
complementary
time.
development.
We do need to get on to books, but this is How to Read Water. This is a fantastic book that talks all about the sea, but also all sorts of water as well. Um, there's this other one, The Secret World of Weather, which is what I was thinking. This picture, this was the one you were expecting after the sand picture, wasn't it?
Oh, I
Is,
don't know. I am happy
is
to
this
be
to do with
surprised. But yeah,
clouds? I
this
was
is just
thinking to do with clouds, maybe.
yeah, it's lovely, lovely example of cumulus mapping land. That's not that it's only about 25-minute drive from my home. This is West Wittering Beach looking towards the Isle of Wight, and you can see how the land warms up faster than the sea. So you get thermals, moist environment. So this is how all of our ancestors would have looked for land. The idea you look for land by looking for land is it's rookie because the clouds will tell you long before land becomes visible. The
Yeah.
higher something is, the further away, the greater the distance you can see it from because of the curvature of the earth. And but we could kind of reverse, at 10 miles from there you'd lose sight of the island, but you wouldn't lose sight of the clouds. But it's nice to see the island there because you can see how reliably the clouds are mapping the land there. But there are plenty of other clues there. You've got mare's tails, the cirrus above that, indicating that there's moisture in the upper atmosphere, and this is one of the early signs that the weather's going to change and there's a front approaching.
I was intrigued by this. I didn't know it was one of the options that you shared with me, and I was like, go on then. What's he going to say about that?
Well, I use this as an example of the superpower of curiosity. I was led down a slate mine for a TV program, and I didn't know we were going down a slate mine initially, and I was a bit worried about it because most of the clues and signs I'm depending on are related to either the sky or the relationship between the sky and the land. But the second you go underground, as far as I was aware, all of that probably goes out the window. But I tuned into the angle of the slate here, or what geologists call dip. I just noticed it angled up towards the right. The sun was out, so I could see it angled up towards south. And then we were 3 levels down in a slate mine, and you just had to look at the slate. And to somebody who doesn't know what you've done, to somebody who doesn't spot the prior curiosity step, they think it's some sort of voodoo. Like, how
I
can
love
you,
that. I
all
love
these twists and turns, you're 3 levels down in a slate mine, how can you get a sense of direction? But it actually, as you can see there, it's quite straightforward.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that. And then I'm a big fan of the trees. I know you're an ambassador of the Woodland Trust. I'm a lifelong member. I love them. And this book, I haven't actually got this book, but what sort of things are you looking at when you look at trees?
Asymmetry is a good place to start. So the wonderful thing about trees is they have no central nervous system, of course. So they are responding sort of locally and autonomously to everything.
Yeah.
So the tree doesn't know the world it has started life in. It doesn't grow, it doesn't wake up in the morning and think, let's grow towards the south because that's where light is. It just senses more light from one side and grows that way. We get more light from the south. So, in this picture, we're looking east, but it affects every single growing part of every single plant. Because unlike, if an animal's not happy with its lot, it will move. But a plant doesn't have that option. So what it has to do is tailor itself to its environment. So
Right.
that's why we find very simple things like in windy places, trees are shorter than in sheltered places. If you walk up out of a river valley, you'll just see the trees getting shorter as the average wind speeds increase. But that principle applies. There are literally hundreds of small ways you can look at a tree, from the color of the leaves to the angle of the branches to the shape of the trunk to the colors in everything we see. And it's all based on that very simple principle that the tree doesn't set out to make natural navigation easy. It just can't help it because it's reflecting the world around it.
And then we've got a few other examples of very different trees, but very different looking trees.
Yeah, here. My simple point is natural navigation as a concept is not. It's still not very popular. I'm trying to share the love of the subject, but it's not a well-known subject. So if somebody's come across the idea of natural navigation, it is likely to be moss grows on the north side of trees or the North Star. But in the case of moss grows on the north side of trees, it's how I illustrate to people natural navigation works by understanding, having a true curiosity in why things are the way they are. So moss doesn't care about north, south, east, west like most organisms. But it does need moisture to thrive and survive. It needs moisture to reproduce. So where you see moss, you can say with certainty it's an environment that retains moisture. It just so happens that the southern sun struggles to get to the north side of trees. So we sometimes find, but if you go into a moist environment, as in here, which is Wistman's Wood in Dartmoor, you're going to find a lot of moss, and direction finding is not easy.
Brilliant. And again, I wasn't sure, this was one of the ones that you'd included, but I wasn't sure what I was
Yeah, this is
looking
just a
at.
nice demonstration of something I call the tick effect. The angle of branches is whispering messages about where most light has come from. Here we've got more branches and more horizontal ones on the left, telling us
Um,
lots more light coming from the left and lower down. On the right, few branches and they're angled towards the sky above, which is the only place that light reaches the north side of trees.
Fantastic.
Um,
But here's a wonderful selection of your books. I've got, yeah,
if I can just mention the one that has just come
here
out.
we go. I've got a page on that as well. Look.
Oh, thank
It's
you.
two
Yeah,
two
I get into
options. Look, whether you're in America, because this is an international court webinar. So in America, you need to look for this cover in Canada, and in the UK for this one. Yes, tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, so I'm in each of my books. I'm taking the very simple idea that there's a cause and a reason for everything we see or sense outdoors, and then just coming at that simple idea from a different direction. So we've thought about the kind of water angling or the tree angling, and in this book I'm taking a nature's calendar view. What are the best clues and signs to look for in January? Some of them are obvious, some of them are were a surprise to me, which is the great joy of writing these books. Is I know part of what's going to be in them, but yeah, at any time of year there will be you improve your chances of finding fun, helpful, and useful clues if you stack the odds in your favor. Is part of the premise of this book. There's not a lot of point trying to use Orion to find east or west in June, but at this time of year, there's lots of helpful things from Orion, and it includes. So most of my books are, you know, sometimes blowing the dust off things that would have been common knowledge 2,000 years ago. Sometimes trying to pioneer new ways of looking at things. This book includes two star compasses, which I'm fairly confident have never appeared in writing before. Again, our ancestors, if we go back far enough, would have been aware of them, but their use must have died out before they were written down. The New York Times has done a piece on that. But that's yeah, it's in this book, it's the same fairly simple idea that everything outdoor is a clue and a sign, but coming at it from the idea that the we can stack the deck in our favor if we know the things to look for in
Perfect.
each month.
So that's Christmas sorted for all of us. Get that on your list. Available from all your
Thanks.
normal bookshop places. Go independent if you can, but absolutely, Tristan will be very pleased if you buy a copy of this book, as I'm very looking forward to seeing that on Christmas Day in my pile of gifts. Thank you so much, Tristan. I think that was the main thing. One thing, future talks. So obviously we've had fantastic talks to them from Tristan. The outdoor adventure navigation, we're looking for ideas for speakers. So if you're listening in and have something you want to talk about, or if you've got somebody you'd like me to get in touch with and ask to have one of these conversations, that would be fantastic. So do let us know. And thank you again so much. What a delight. Absolutely brilliant. My mind's just like, I'm going to try and read the books and try and remember everything that's in the books, but probably better to come on one of your courses, I think.
Thanks so much, Colette, for a really, really fun chat. And thanks everybody for joining us. Happy navigating, everybody.
Happy navigating. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye.